It's too weak, and what we recommended when we presented our brief is that a special person be appointed to make sure that there's proper action in terms of the implementation of the report and recommendations.
Tonight, reaction to the release of the Quebec Inquiry report out of Val-d'Or.
The Indigenous students that we have here on the board who are now going to be able to see themselves reflected in the curriculum.
A contemporary Indigenous Voices course is introduced to 13 Southern Ontario high schools.
You're just so there for every frame, every cell of the film. So there's a weird moment when you go, wow.
And Red Snow premieres at the Vancouver International Film Festival. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen. Indigenous women accusing Quebec Provincial Police of physical and sexual abuse in 2015 shook the province to its core. It led to an inquiry, but not just about police, but several other public services as well.
The inquiry's final report was released on Monday. Tom Fenario has more.
Jacques Vien is the commissioner of the Quebec Inquiry into Relations with Indigenous Peoples. He says the time has come for Quebec to make an apology.
Ici, je recommande au gouvernement de faire amende honorable et de présenter des excuses au peuple autochtone du Québec pour les préjudices causés depuis trop longtemps par les lois, les politiques, les normes ou les pratiques des services publics à leur endroit.
On Monday, Vien tabled the long-awaited result of the 2.5-year inquiry. This 520-page document outlines 142 calls to action, not just into policing, but other public services such as health, justice, and social services. The recommendations include more funding for housing, implementing the UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People, and making services more friendly for non-French-speaking Indigenous people. Vien says the calls to action are meant to combat what he describes as a systemic racism in the province.
Dans une société développée comme la nôtre, ce constat est tout simplement inacceptable.
AFN Regional Chief Ghislain Picard says the report confirms what First Nations have been saying for a long time. He welcomes the report, but worries about accountability around its recommendations.
It's too weak, and what we recommended when we presented our brief is that a special person be appointed to make sure that there's proper action in terms of the implementation of the report and recommendations.
Following the report's release, Quebec representatives of Indigenous Affairs, Justice, and Social Services held a press conference. They praised the courage of the women who came forward and emphasized that they will be meeting with Indigenous leaders on October 17th to discuss how to implement the calls to action.
Que ce n'est pas qu'une responsabilité du gouvernement, que ce n'est pas qu'une responsabilité des nations autochtones, c'est une responsabilité de société.
When asked about the apology, Damore was evasive.
Je vous dis que mercredi, il y aura une déclaration du Premier ministre qui a rapport avec le juge Vien.
Picard has strong feelings about who should receive the apology.
We feel that that apology should go towards the women who were the trigger of this commission.
Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Val-d'Or, Quebec.
Monday was Orange Shirt Day, a day to remember and honor the students that attended residential schools across Canada. Jolene Banning was at a Winnipeg event held in conjunction with Orange Shirt Day here in Winnipeg and brings us this.
The rain didn't stop hundreds gathered at Portage and Main in Winnipeg for Orange Shirt Day, an annual event to remember the 150,000 students who attended residential schools across Canada.
We're here remembering all of our relatives, all of our ancestors, all of our friends and family who have survived. We're here to acknowledge them, and we're getting a blessing from the Creator because everything always gets blessed when there's a little bit of rain.
130 residential schools were established across Canada in an attempt to assimilate Indigenous kids into Western Canadian culture. The last school closed in 1996. The goal of assimilation meant students were subjected to years of horrific treatment resulting in loss of culture, language, spirituality, and family. Several thousand kids died at these schools. Many still feel the effects and are working on healing and change. Sage Kent, one young mom, was in attendance with her son.
Because I just wanted to teach my son that we're still fighting an ongoing fight. And I think it's important for him to learn and be educated and be a part of the solution for that.
Michelle Cameron's mother and all her aunties attended residential schools. She says there isn't enough being done to raise awareness in the education system. As a business owner, she's trying to change that.
there's not enough awareness. So it's really, really important for me as a business owner to give back, and that's why we participated in the Orange Shirt Day. So we created this design, and we're giving back to the Orange Shirt Society and the IRS Thrivers program here in Manitoba.
The gathering included the very young two elders, started off with a round dance, and ended with shared stories of resilience and courage, instilling hope for the future. For APTN National News, I'm Jolene Banning in Winnipeg.
We're always looking to hear what you have to say. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/APTN News. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest Indigenous news.
During the colorful commemoration of Orange Shirt Day, the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts issued an urgent appeal to replace part of a public art piece that commemorates residential school survivors. Here's Lindsay Richardson.
It's towered over the north side of Sherbrooke Street at the entrance of the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts for over 2 years now. The 69-foot-tall redwood cedar totem pole is the subject of great fanfare, and for its artist, a symbol of his time in residential school.
It was kind of a healing process for him, kind of a catharsis to make him go elsewhere, and he also did it as an act of reconciliation.
While it took 2 years for Charles Joseph to finish his seminal work, it took just minutes for a piece of it to vanish under the cover of night.
This hand was removed forcefully.
Only 2 screws and a dowel hole remain where the statue's right hand used to be. Evidence of vandalism, perhaps petty theft, done in the wee hours of Friday morning.
2 people just took off with the hand and just probably hung themselves on the hand and went away with it.
Lacerte says security footage shows 2 hooded figures with faces obscured. The incident was reported to police and appeals have been made on social media.
But for the hand itself, the value of the hand, it doesn't have any value unless it's attached to the totem itself. Because now what happens to the totem is that it's lost its integrity because there's a missing part.
Anyone with information is urged to contact the museum or police, for the moment with no questions asked.
Things like that do happen. They happen rarely, but they can happen.
Trying to do right by what's left. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
Every October 1st, the Mi'kmaq celebrate Treaty Day in Nova Scotia, an event that also kicks off Mi'kmaq History Month. Hundreds gathered in downtown Halifax Tuesday to commemorate the peace and friendship treaties the Mi'kmaq signed with the Crown. And it's a day of recognition and celebration. But the Mi'kmaq want to remind the province that work still needs to be done.
Of recognition that we're still in the progress of and in the process of coming to what we should be and what we should have been a long time ago, because the treaties were signed in peace and friendship, and those intentions have never been honored.
We never surrendered our land to anybody, and so today we're still negotiating our culture and survival and negotiating our rights to the land with the federal provincial governments.
It's election day in the Northwest Territories. We'll check in on the vote after the break.
But first, here's a look at Wednesday's weather forecast. Off to the east coast, we've got 10 in cloud in St. John, 17 and rain in Halifax. Happy Valley Goose Bay 6 with some rain, Kuujjuaq 6 with some rain. St. Jovite, mix of sun and cloud and 11 degrees. Montreal, mix of sun and cloud and 20. Ottawa is 14 and rain. London, 30 and rain. Kapuskasing, some snow and 6 degrees. Big Trout Lake, mostly sunny and 7. Puckatawagan's 10 and sunshine, 10 for Norway House and sunny. 7 in Winnipeg, mix of sun and cloud, 6 for Dauphin and Brandon. 9 in Swift Current, 9 for Saskatoon and North Battle for 2, sunshine now down there. 10 for Stony Rapids and Uranian City and sunny. 9 for Buffalo Narrows, Larange and Meadow Lake. Welcome back. Voters in the Northwest Territories are casting their ballot today. 58 candidates are seeking to represent their ridings in the 19th Legislative Assembly. Aside from 3 of the territory's electoral districts, Hay River, Monkman, and the Mackenzie Delta, which are already acclaimed, 16 ridings are up for grabs. Unfinished land claims, affordable housing, lack of infrastructure, and job diversification are at the forefront in many of the ridings, while a Polytechnic University and violence in the downtown core have been consistently debated for Yellowknife ridings.
One big feature of this election is the fact that more women are running. In fact, there are more female candidates than there were in 2011 and 2015 combined, with 22 women and 36 men all putting their name on the ballot. As with NWT consensus government, while we won't be able to choose our next premier or know which MLA will be suited for which cabinet position, with more women running, there is a very good chance that there will be a shift in politics in the north. The polls will remain open until 8 p.m. this evening. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Today in Whitehorse, the Council of Yukon First Nations and the Assembly of First Nations joined forces in an effort to get people in the territory to the polling stations in this month's federal election. The campaign called Yukon That Votes provides First Nations people in the Yukon information about the parties and how to vote. Assembly of First Nations Regional Chief Kluena Demick says it's important Indigenous people exercise their right to vote.
This last federal election, we saw 61.5% of First Nations people across the country vote. That's been the largest ever in Canadian history. And so this is about ensuring that, you know, our right to vote wasn't always there as Indigenous people, as women. And so this is a really important moment of opportunity to get people the information so that they're able to cast their ballots.
A significant development in Ontario as Indigenous voices are now mandatory in 13 Southern Ontario high schools as an act of reconciliation. Annette Francis brings us that story from Newcastle, Ontario.
Using the holistic cycle of learning, and the nice thing about this is it engages every part of your being. So
Marilyn Robital has been teaching English for the past 15 years, and for the first time gets to include her Métis culture in the curriculum. It's all part of the Contemporary Indigenous Voices course, now a mandatory English credit for all grade 11 high school students in the Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board.
I'd say it's a dream come true for me, being able to share some of the personal aspects of my life with students in a way that is meaningful. Go ahead and go to your groups.
It's only the fourth school board in Ontario to make the course mandatory. Teachers have all been provided with new teaching resources and have received cultural competency training. The Indigenous education consultant says it's an exciting time and a lot of work.
Because the curriculum component is there, and that's all we're asking our teachers to cover. They are not being asked to bring in anything cultural, and that's where the community and the authentic voice has to come in.
Now the students here at Clark High School will soon be studying the works of authors like Thomas King, Drew Hayden Taylor, and Thompson Highway.
And so we've talked about the medicine wheel and the 7 sacred teachings and treaties, and we've really talked, and some different stories, and we've really talked about the culture that they're going to be reading about and learning about, and it's giving them the background knowledge.
Just 3 weeks into the school year, 15-year-old Emily Rozowski says the change is good.
I really like history, so we're learning about treaties, and I find that interesting. But I also find it cool how everything, like the medicine wheel, for example, it's a cycle. I don't know, I just find it interesting how it relates to everything.
The Kawartha School Board serves students from 3 First Nations. As an Indigenous education consultant with the school board, Marjolaine Lapointe supports teachers implementing Indigenous education. She says it's a significant move to reconciliation.
Of the Indigenous students that we have here in the board, who are now going to be able to see themselves reflected in the curriculum, they're going to be able to engage with their realities in the course that they're taking.
LaPointe says now she would like to see Indigenous content included in all grades, starting in kindergarten. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Newcastle.
This summer, the federal court approved a class action settlement for survivors of Indian day schools. The settlement will cost billions. Over 130,000 kids who went to 720 schools across Canada could be in for compensation. And that's more than the residential schools. But some students were left out. And Jolene Banning brings us one of their stories.
Some of Larry Hill's family were members of the St. Peter's Reserve before they were kicked off their land near Selkirk, Manitoba, and moved 200 kilometers away. His grandfather managed to buy a piece of land on the original reserve, now part of a municipality. Larry grew up there and did his primary grades at the Margaret Hayworth School. This school was not included in the settlement.
I feel it's unjust. I was, after I found out, they quite frankly said that I didn't qualify, and I couldn't figure out why. And she says, well, you weren't a federal school. I said, really?
Margaret Hayworth School was on land that was once part of St. Peter's. Larry Hill says he wasn't the only Indigenous kid going there. So why wouldn't they be part of the settlement? One single law firm handled the class action. They have a simple-sounding explanation. We cannot speak to the ultimate decision not to include any specific school, as those determinations were made by the government. Our research has shown that these schools were funded, managed, and controlled by others, such as the provinces, churches, and First Nations. Margaret Hayworth was operated by the province of Manitoba on land that is no longer reserve land, eventually destroyed by fire in 1975. This explanation does not sit well with Larry Hill.
I wonder how many people were like me that went through that experience and are not going to be heard.
For now, he is left with the aftermath of his education, not knowing his Mohawk and Ojibwe culture, that he was less of a human being, a savage. He says the class action settlement has the same effect.
School was school. That's one of the forms they used to indoctrinate you. You have no choice.
For APTN National News, I'm Jolene Banning in Winnipeg.
Still to come, Kent Monkman comes home to Winnipeg to unveil his exhibit on loss and pain.
And we'll take you to the premiere of a new film by a Métis writer and director, but first, here's the rest of Wednesday's weather. To northern Alberta, we got 14 in sunshine in High Level, 13 in sunny in Fort McMurray, 12 in sunshine for Edmonton, 9 in sunny for Calgary, 13 mix of sun and cloud in Campbell River, 15 in sunny and up in Quesnel, 10 and cloud for Dease Lake, 12 with a mix of sun and cloud from Prince George, 11 for Dawson City and Mayo with some rain, 11 in Whitehorse and rainy, 11 with a mix of sun and cloud in Waughty and Wrigley, Fort Simpson mostly sunny and 11. Tuck is -3 and a mix of sun and cloud. Paulatuck 3, a mix of sun and cloud. 3s for Chesterfield, Bakers Lake, Whale Cove, and sunshine there. Tallyoak is 2 with some snow. Clyde River, cloud and 3 degrees. Pangertung 5 and sunny.
Welcome back. Celebrated Cree artist Kent Monkman has returned home to Winnipeg with his exhibit, Shame and Prejudice. Jolene Banning has that story.
The provocative and moving artwork of Cree artist Kent Monkman opened Friday at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. The exhibit, Shame and Prejudice, A Story of Resilience, aims to highlight the many different devastating periods in time that First Nations people survived, including genocidal policies like residential schools, as well as mass incarceration and displacement. Showcasing this exhibit is just one way Stephen Boyers, CEO of the Winnipeg Art Gallery, is working to indigenize the space.
By truly amplifying the voices of Indigenous artists in Canada and beyond, and in partnership with the WAG's own Indigenous Advisory Circle, we have endeavored to respond to the TRC's calls to action.
That's not all the WAG has done to respond to the calls to action. There is now Indigenous representation on staff and the board of directors, and artists are given space for their work that focuses on issues specific to their perspectives. like changing a history that would have Indigenous peoples erased or replaced altogether with a white narrative.
These are places that Indigenous people have been living in for thousands of years, and it was really to refute these ideas that were brought by Europeans. You know, European modernity was about coming to North America with a blank slate and having everybody just conveniently forget that this land belonged to somebody else.
Although the exhibit takes a life-size visceral look at Indigenous loss and pain, it also shows a lot more.
This show, even though it tackles some very dark chapters, it's really intended to be very optimistic, to talk about the resiliency of our people to survive, you know, these different acts of genocide through the colonial project.
The exhibit will be on display until February 2020, and thanks to an anonymous donor, the deposition from Monkman's Urban Res series will now have a permanent home at the WAG. I'm Jolene Banning for APTN National News in Winnipeg.
A feature film by a Métis writer-director premieres at the Vancouver International Film Festival. And as APTN's Tina House explains, it's a story about two unique cultures connecting through war.
It took Marie Clements 9 years to finish her latest feature film called Red Snow. It tells the story of a Gwich'in man who becomes a soldier and is sent to Afghanistan to fight in the war.
He's in an ambush and taken hostage by the Taliban. And so he's held hostage there and uses his upbringing, who he is as an Indigenous person, to survive.
Let him go! Now! It's been enough killing for today.
He eventually escapes with a Pashtun family and has to go through treacherous mountains to get to safety in Pakistan. Most of the film was shot near Kamloops, BC, which doubled as Afghanistan. Other scenes were filmed in the Northwest Territories. The $2.8 million production features acting veteran Tantu Cardinal and up-and-coming actor Asivik Kustation playing the lead character. The role of the lead character from Afghanistan was played by Muzda Jamazalda.
This is her first lead role in a feature film, but she's known worldwide as a international pop star. And she had a talk show in Afghanistan and was considered the Oprah of Afghanistan because of her fight for women's rights and children's rights.
Clement says that after winning the Women in the Director's Chair Feature Film Award, a prize of in-kind services to help make the film, she began to assemble her team to make it happen.
You're just so there for every frame, every cell of the film. So there's a weird moment when you go, wow, when you package it all up and you send it away. It's so awesome.
Red Snow screens at the Vancouver International Film Festival on October 6th and 8th. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
Looks like a good one.
Looks pretty interesting indeed.
Yep.
That's your APTN National News for this Tuesday. For much more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca.
And while you're there, you can check out our new Vote 2019 page where you can find all of the news on the election campaign. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Thanks for tuning in.
And I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for watching. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.